All right. All right, great. All right, greetings, brethren. We are here with Professor
Opolot.
Opolot. Okay,
Yes.
we'll start that over, okay? Greetings, we're here with Professor Opolot Okia, and you are the Assistant Professor at the Department of History here at Wright State, and you have your PhD in Modern African History at West Virginia University.
Yes.
And we are honored to be able to interview you on a history that is not too well known, particularly among young African Americans here in the States, and that's the history of Patrice Lumumba and the larger history of the Congo and colonization in Africa.
Yes.
We want to start off with just a little bit of the history of the Congo, Zaire, if we could start off with that, the Berlin Conference. And can you go ahead and give us a history starting at that point?
Yeah, the Congo is a very large country in the center portion of Africa. It's about 2 million square miles. It has about 250 different ethnic groups, and it's known for being very, very rich in minerals. And that's what brought a lot of the outsiders. So a lot of different ethnic groups in the Congo, but the main ones are the Luba, the Lulua, also the Bakongo. Those are some of the main ones that have played significant roles throughout the history. Originally, the Congo, it wasn't one country.
Mm-hmm.
It was made up of different communities, like the Luba Lunda Empire in the southwest. Right? So it wasn't just one country. But during the 19th century, you found a lot of Swahili and also Arab traders started coming into the area in the east, which is now Kivu, the eastern portion, and they started trading for ivory. That was the big item.
Okay.
And they also were trading for slaves. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, right. And then
ivory, just for those who didn't know,
Yeah.
came mainly from the elephants, or
Right, from the elephants.
Rhinos too, or
they're not so much rhinos, but
Okay.
elephants. Yeah,
Okay.
they're killing the elephants and taking the ivory, and it was traded back along the Indian Ocean. A lot of the ivory actually was going to, in the 19th century, is going to India, and then also was coming to the West, in the United States, England, etc. So that's
because one of the things that you see in black and white pictures sometimes is you see stacks and it looks like
Right.
logs.
Yeah.
But that's actually the tusk
right.
of the elephants, and then when you look at those pictures, you can begin to imagine, the wholesale slaughter.
Right, right,
those.
exactly, and that's the reason why actually the trade penetrated into the area which we know as the Congo, because by the late 19th century, a lot of the elephants in Eastern Africa had died out.
Mm.
The ones that they were using, so the populations had declined so much, so they kept moving further and further inland to find more populations of elephants, which brought them into the Congo.
Okay.
And so that was one of the reasons why, again, they were drawn in. However, in the 19th century, though, again, you also find, late 19th century, you find that Europeans now are starting to become engaged in various portions of Africa. Europeans were exploring different parts of Africa, trying to determine what the potential was for making money, resources.
Mm.
And by the 19th century, you find that the Belgians are going to be engaged in exploratory activities in the Congo. You also find that the French also will be involved in, again, exploration in the Congo as well. And then also, just in general, to widen the scope, you have the Belgians and French. You also have the British. Right? They also were engaged also in exploration, again, in Africa as well in the 19th century, and also the Germans. And so what happens is that by the 1880s, you have these various European powers. They're trying to determine what resources they can extract from the Congo, and they were concerned that they're going to start competing. Because the big issue was the Congo. The French were again exploring along the Congo, and the British were concerned that if the French actually colonized that area, then they would not allow trade, free trade, right? For British traders,
Right.
right? So, but then also again you had the Belgians, but the Belgians were not as powerful as the British and the French. So what the British did is they supported the Belgian claims for exploration in the Congo. So you had that conflict. And so basically what happens is that because there's this underlying tension between the various European powers, in the 1880s and 1884, actually, they decided to have a conference. And that's what you mentioned, the Congress of Berlin, the Berlin West Africa Conference.
Okay.
And it started in 1880, it went from 1884, 1885. It was a series of meetings between the various European powers. Unofficially, there was also a representative from the United States, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, but not officially.
Okay.
Yeah, but there were no African representatives.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
You know, in this fight for Africa that the Europeans are tussling over,
Yeah.
you know, at this conference, there's the fate of Africa. There's no Africans there.
There's no Africans there, even though actually Liberia at the time, Liberia was colonized by the American Colonization Society, and it actually had diplomatic credentials. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So because in the rest of Africa, it was made up primarily again of different polities. So the various European powers didn't recognize them, but they did recognize their diplomatic credentials of Liberia, but they were not invited. Right? So anyway, so they meet in these various meetings. It was held in Berlin. It was organized initially by the Bismarck of Germany, because also Germany is now in the 19th century has also become involved again in exploration in Africa.
Wow.
Because again, everyone is looking. They called it the phrase that attributed to King Leopold II of
Belgium.
He called it his magnificent African cake. Right. So again, they were thinking we can find something there. So you find by the late 19th century, I mean, the Germans. They're in Togo, they're in Namibia. They're also going to be in Tanzania as well. Mm-hmm. So again, and the Cameroons too. So again, there was also they also were concerned too that they didn't want to lose out as well. Because another factor I didn't mention was particularly after 1870. After 1870 in Europe, there's a worldwide depression, and as a result of that depression, there's a fear among a lot of the statesmen in Europe that if they do not retain access to raw materials, this can seriously weaken the national security. Right?
Okay.
And then also keep in mind that in Europe during this time period, post-1870s, there is this rise of militarism leading to later on World War I. So there was that fear. And so all of this is going to again push them again to have this meeting, because ultimately, as you said, they're not going to invite any Africans. All they want to do is make sure that they don't fight among themselves. And that's basically what the Congress was about. It wasn't actually about carving up the individual territories. It's more about laying down the ground rules so they will not fight among themselves. So as a result of that meeting, they laid down a couple of ground rules. One of them was that they would have to effectively occupy a piece of African land before they can lay claim to it. Right? The other rule tied in with that was if they made claims on African land along the coastal area, they can then use this to extend them into the interior. And then another rule which they laid with that was also that if they signed a treaty with an African, right, even if it was an African who maybe did not have any political legitimacy in the area, he could just have been a nobody, right? They could use that as a basis for establishing control in that area, as did happen frequently. They would just find somebody who was just maybe somebody who had helped them with a caravan trade, and they'd say, okay, sign this treaty. They'd put affix their thumbprint on it, and they'd say, okay, we can use this now as a basis now for taking over this area.
What?
Yeah, and that's what they did. And then, of course, the last thing is they agreed that they would ensure they'd have free trade on the Congo.
Okay.
Free trade on the Congo and also the Niger River. It was another bone of contention as well.
Right.
And so then after that, post 1885, they're going to start moving in to take over various parts of Africa. And that period from 1885 to about 1905. This is the military takeover of Africa. In the early European history books, they called it the pacification phase.
Okay.
But this actually is the most violent phase of colonial rule in Africa. This is when people are being shot, killed, etc., as they're losing land. And so during this period, they're going to militarily take over Africa.
So that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask is that what were the Africans doing, at this time?
Yeah.
I mean, because the European whole economic system is much radically different than the African economic system. So did they have any concept really of what was taking place?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, that's one of the issues. On one level, just in terms of identity, right? By this point in time, late 19th century, because of the impact in Europe of ideas associated with social Darwinism, scientific racism, these sorts of ideas, Europeans already had a more developed racial identity, right?
Right.
And so, but Africans at this point in time, no, the identity was still along the lines of ethnicity. So what you'll find is that actually during this period when the pacification phase, when countries were losing their sovereignty, it actually happened as a result of collaborations between Europeans and Africans against other Africans. So basically, if you want to ask the question, what were Africans doing? They either resisted, they either collaborated, or they submitted. Some just submitted, right? So it was those three avenues they had, and ultimately, European success was bridged upon having superior military technology, right? You know, in the 1880s in Egypt, as the first time they'd used this machine gun, which was very prominent again in some of their victories as well. Also, again, they have use of railway cars when they develop those as well too, telegraph, etc. And just the knowledge, you know, the geographic knowledge of the various areas. Map making had also developed by this point in time as well. A lot of things Africans wouldn't know, and so they didn't. But you did find some examples of Africans who were able to, attempted, right, to pull together a sort of nationalist struggle, right, against the Europeans. So you do find that, you know, but again, but in general, again, it won't be as successful.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. And so we have this Berlin conference.
Yeah.
We have King Leopold being given the Congo, basically by the UN backing that decision.
Yeah, right. And so, you know, after the Berlin conference, they recognized Leopold's territorial claims in the Congo because he had backed this earlier explorer, H.M. Stanley. Right in that area, right? And so that was the basis of his claim.
He went out for King Leopold to survey the land.
Exactly. Okay. Right, survey the land, right? Because you know the French had also sent someone into the Congo. This guy, Savonian de Brazza, right? Okay. And so that was but they recognized Stanley's claim because again that's what the British wanted. Because again the British they feared the French more than did the Belgians. So let Leopold have this, right, and not the French, because the French then would also could influence or could threaten English concerns in Egypt, and they're worried about the Nile and also worried about the Suez Canal. So they keep the French away, keep the Belgians there. So when Leopold takes this over again, he does this under the cover of a humanitarian concern. Right? Again, it's supposed to be under the cover of humanitarian initiative, under his African Association. They're trying to bring civilization to these people in Africa, right?
Right. Yeah. Like one author said, their quote term of civilization meant whether they would shoot them down, you know, whatever. That was whatever they did. That was their idea of civilizing.
Yeah, and basically, you know, it was just a name, right? I mean, the bottom line is, Leopold goes into the Congo, which he actually ruled as his own personal fiefdom. Yeah. Right. It wasn't actually part of the Belgian state, not until 1908. And so, you know, 1885, 1908, again, it's going to be ruled basically as his own personal fiefdom, and all he was trying to do was extract as much wealth from it as much as he could. And the main items, the main cash crops are going to be extracted again, going to be going back to ivory again. Okay. And then, of course, rubber, right? The development of the development of the inner tube for the bicycle tires, right? It really revolutionized rubber production again, and this is before the development of synthetic rubber. They're getting rubber again from the plants, and again, one of the areas is going to be, of course, Africa. And so it just took off, and he made a lot of money from that. But as you're very aware, I mean, one of the problems is that again in the Congo, because they were so because their goal was just to make money, they didn't care how they brutalized the people who lived there. And so during that phase, you know, starting in 1888, 1890 onwards up to 1908, E.D. Morel, the British journalist who led that international campaign against the abuses in the Congo, called that period red rubber, right? Again, when they, you know, according to some authors, they think as many as 10 million people died during that time period. Because again, in the areas where they're again extracting rubber and ivory, the villagers would have to have a quota they'd have to meet. Yes. Yeah, and so like a rubber tax. Yes. Right, and if you didn't meet that, then they were the Belgians under this this army they had, the Force Publique. Again, they would go in there. They sometimes destroy the village, and also they would they would kill people that cut off their arms, cut off their hands. Cut off their feet.
Yes.
And so they did a lot of terrible things.
If they didn't meet that quota.
They didn't meet the quota, right? Yeah.
And one of the things that I think that even the listeners have to understand is they didn't discriminate with age.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, you get, one of the people who led that international campaign against the Congo, Idi Amirel, he also had a lot of pictures, and you can see that online, actually. They show, I remember one poignant scene they show in there, this man who's probably like in his 20s or something, he's looking at the hands and feet of his daughter, who's only like about 6. And so they had killed her, chopped her feet. And so that's, those are the sorts of things that are happening there as well. Yeah.
One of the things that I want, if you could give the viewers an understanding is, what is colonialization? The extracting out and nothing going back in. Yeah. So explain it and how it devastated really Africa and really put it into what I guess some would say was the Dark Ages.
Yeah, well, colonization was the physical, the cultural, and of course the political, social, economic domination of Africa by various European powers. And the extraction you're talking about is most European powers, actually all European powers in Africa, their main goal was to develop the extraction of resources from their various territories. And that was it. Right? It wasn't. That was it. It wasn't about
no development.
It wasn't about development of industries, improving infrastructure, and like that. It was just about extraction. So what you'll find is that in the various territories, they quickly targeted a particular resource. In the southern portion of the Congo, Katanga, they're exporting tin, copper, right? So that's going to be another. And it was all over like in various territories. So basically. They didn't develop the economies. The economies at independence for a lot of these countries in the 1960s, they're very outward-looking. They call them extroverted, right? They're built on primarily the exportation of just a couple of cash crops or minerals, and that's it. You won't find a very balanced economy. And then also with that as well, because the economies were so distorted, primarily built upon just the extraction of just a couple of cash crops or minerals, you also see that you don't have a very diversified class of people as well, right? So you have a large pool of people who are impoverished, right, to live in the rural areas, and you have a very tiny clique of people who we would call middle class, right, who have benefited in some ways from the colonial system. And so this also was another legacy of colonial rule as well, too.
Now, and we'll bring it on up to how Patrice Lumumba comes into birth in this terrible situation.
Yeah.
But did they have, like in slavery, they had, we'll just use the term that most people are familiar with, the field Negroes and the house Negroes.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you look at Lumumba's case, you see that as well. I mean, Lumumba comes to power in the 1950s at the head of this political party. And what's interesting about that is when he came to power in the late 50s, about 1958, around that time period, he also was in competition with other African leaders at that time period who also were in charge of political parties. One example was the president at independence, Joseph Kasavubu. Right? Again, he was a member of this political party called Abakat, which represented again the Bakongo. Then you had another important actor, a political actor during that time period, also comes to power as well, Moise Tshombe, right? Again, who's going to lead the Katanga secession from the Congo after independence. And he was also affiliated with a different political party that also again was funded and had a lot of connections again with the Belgians and also the multinational corporations that had a lot of interest in the Belgian Congo as well. So in that sense, one can make the correlation that Lumumba represented, I think, more of the aspirations of the people, but some of his fellow comrades, right, who also played important roles in the decolonization process, like Kasavubu, etc., represented more of the more conservative goals. They basically wanted to to take power from the colonialists
Okay.
and assume power themselves. Yeah, so that's one of
okay.
the issues that comes up as well. Because the other thing also in the Congo is they had this policy of assimilation, right? So again, so you'll find that Africans who had been assimilated, right, learned French, were Roman Catholics,
Because that's one of the things that we find in Lumumba's history that is taught in Protestant school, Catholic school.
Exactly,
so they were in the Congo, and I forget it was I think it may be Lumumba who said that when they came in, we had the land, they had the Bible.
Yeah.
They taught us to pray. When we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bible.
Right, that's a good point. Right, exactly. So they didn't. That culture is taken away in their land too.
Right.
Yeah. So
now, one of the things that we read about Patrice Lumumba, that he came from a smaller tribe than the other two individuals that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And that, I guess that helped him to stay non-tribal.
Yeah, exactly. And that's right. His political party, the MNC, again, it was actually the only one that really had a more pan-ethnic base, right? Because again, he comes from a smaller ethnic group, the Tela, and he also in his he was educated and he could read and write, so he worked as a civil servant. He traveled around the different parts of the Congo, and he also spoke Kiswahili. So again, that's so I'm saying. So he had I think because of his background, right? Again, he had a more broader look, a vision, right, for what the Congo could come and become. Something more in line again, with someone like Kwame Nkrumah, as opposed to guys like Kasavubu and Shombe, etc., who are thinking more in terms of well, what can I do for my group?
Right.
And that's now is one of the issues.
They were keeping that tribal mentality.
Exactly. Yeah, and he had definitely a more Pan-Africanist vision, definitely.
Now, one of the things that in his history when we're coming up is that he was arrested in 1955 on charges of embezzlement for post office funds, but he was released after a while. Can you?
I mean, basically, the French, the Belgians feared him, right? And when he took a trip to Belgium and returned again, they accused him of embezzlement because they're already aware of his activities again with these various civic associations that were forming, during that time period, which would eventually become the political parties. So they tried to basically undermine him, and that's something that you see in his own political history, as he progressed. For example, after he was arrested, right? Again, the pretext was again the Congolese troops, committed these atrocities against other Congolese. So they said Lumumba is a firebrand, right? Because he was such a great orator. But again, he's the one who was responsible for this. So it's another one of the attempts again to undermine him as well. Yeah.
Now he was also a family man.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that aspect of his life?
Yeah, I mean, he had several kids, and his his daughter actually now is, I think, she heads one of the government ministries in the Congo now as well too.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So I mean, he had kids. When he was murdered, he was 45, I think, around that time period.
Right.
So he was a family.
Some of his children weren't even. Well, I know that one of his sons, it would have to be one, but I know that one of his children weren't even born at the time. Born after his death or assassination.
I mean, he was definitely murdered. So,
and that, to skip forward just a little bit, and that is on the 50th anniversary, something that is starting to come out now about the United States involvement, because I believe Belgium had already apologized. I don't know what all came behind the apology, but they had apologized for their involvement in his assassination. But the United States, through the CIA, who seemed to be at that time knocking off everybody, didn't, or the United States hasn't declared its involvement in Patrice Lumumba's assassination. But we do know that they tried to assassinate him through toxins in his toothpaste and things like that.
But at the very least, though, the U.S. Supported the troops that eventually captured him under Mobutu, and that's where he paid them for money that came from the CIA, and also they provided them with logistical support as well.
Okay.
So I mean, at the very least, they're culpable in that way. I mean, because the U.S. saw him as a threat because they thought he was a communist.
Right.
They thought that he was going to turn the Congo into a fiefdom for the Soviet Union, right? A satellite state for the Soviet Union.
They saw him as a African Fidel Castro.
Exactly right. Yeah. So that was So when when he's out of the way, that made everybody here a little bit more relaxed under the eye.
Can you talk about the movement National Congolese?
Yeah.
And how that formed, and then his involvement in the independence conference that was with Kwame Nkrumah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the MNC it formed in the 50s out of several different groups. One group was associated with they called it the African Conscience Group. These were Catholic people who were more educated, well-read, etc., who had a more conservative vision of what independence should be.
Okay.
So that was one element as well.
Mm-hmm.
The other element was, again, guys like Lumumba,
Yes.
and who also, again, the same thing. I mean, they're also educated as well, but again, a little more of a Pan-Africanist vision of what the government should be as well. He had Lumumba felt that he wanted a very strong central government, so that's also another element. Also, part of the MNC is going to be the trade union as well. Again, during the 50s, there were a lot of strikes in the Congo, right? And so, because again of the development of the extraction industries again in areas like Katanga, so that also was an element as well too. Okay. And so anyway, so this is going to be again one of the parties, and starting in '57 when the Belgians start allowing municipal elections and they start moving towards decolonization, the MNC is going to start winning a lot of these elections, and eventually they're going to win the final election in May 1960 that paved the way again for independence. And
this is how Patrice Lumumba became the first prime minister.
Right, and he was also head of government. And Joseph Kasavubu became the acting president, right, which is more like a figurehead. So that's why. So he was democratically elected. He had the most support. The MNC did split though eventually, but you're right. He had support of the people.
Okay,
without a doubt. Yeah.
Now we've just moved right on into him becoming the prime minister.
Yeah.
This, I guess, is something that really, put fear in the European exploiters.
Yeah. Right.
He was only in for 10 months.
Right, exactly. I mean, he comes into power in June 1960, and then almost 2 weeks later, they have an army mutiny. The soldiers in the Force Publique, as it was called then, then they already changed the name. They mutinied because they wanted, when they had independence, a lot of the officers in the army were still the Belgians.
Okay.
Yeah, and so after independence, a lot of the African soldiers mutinied because they said we want to take their positions, and also they wanted more pay. Right. So that was one of the issues, and also again one of the people who was involved in the mutiny was Desiree Mobutu.
Mobutu, right?
Yeah, Mobutu, who actually was a friend of Lumumba's, right? Yeah, so that happens. That's the first problem he has, and so what he does there basically is he appeases a lot of the people in the military. Mobutu starts out as a non-commissioned officer, will eventually become the
colonel.
Right. He just gets moved up to become the chief of staff of the whole army.
Okay.
Right, and so that's going to be one of the issues there, is that you'll have the promotion of some of these officers like Mobutu, who a little bit they come to power, but very quickly, and it's unsure exactly what their goals are. The other problem that happens a little bit just 2 days later, right, is going to be Katanga is going to secede, right now, and now is again led by Moise Tshombe,
right,
and again he's going to be supported by the Belgians, is also going to be supported eventually again by a lot of white mercenaries who came in from southern Rhodesia and also South Africa. And so that's going to be the other issue as well. And then a little bit later after that, just a month later, another area also secedes as well. And this was South Kasai. That's the area where they produce a lot of diamonds. And so they'll also again pull out as well. And so he's faced with all these different crises, right, just everywhere.
I mean, wow, and the UN is also involved, and they are supposed to go down, I think, where it's supposed to go down to Katanga and help, but it turns out that they were helping, to further, alienate it from the Congo.
Yeah, right. I mean, because of the Katanga secession, again, Lumumba called for the UN to come in. Yeah,
right.
Because he thought that they would come in and they'd stabilize it and they would end the secession and get the Belgians out, right? Because the Belgians, after the secession, after the army mutiny, the Belgians sent troops, right? And again, they go into the
mainly protect the white Belgians who were there, just like in South Africa.
Exactly.
Exploiting once again, just like in Zimbabwe.
Right.
One of the things that got him, and he was already in trouble with the United States President Roosevelt, Eisenhower.
Yeah.
At that time, because as you were saying, they feared that he would, turn to the Russians, the Soviets.
Yeah.
And he actually had to call on the Soviets.
Yeah, because he wasn't getting any support again from the U.S. He actually tried to get support from the U.S. to help him again with the Katanga, but again they refused. And then when the UN does send troops, again the troops aren't going to do anything about the Belgians, which he thought they would do. So that was a problem. So he did turn to the Soviets. They did provide about 1,000 or so, probably less than that, advisors, and also again some also logistical support as well too. The U.S. also feared him because, a little bit earlier in 1958. Lumumba had attended the All African People's Congress hosted by Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first leader of the first country to gain independence in Africa, which is Ghana. And again, Nkrumah was seen as this radical, as Marxist, and also he's a Pan-Africanist as well. And so that was also guilty by association. So they figured, he's going to be too radical, and so he done that as well. And as a result, they also felt he should be marginalized. The other thing also is about Lumumba is he was a great speaker, and he told things like they were, and so that was another problem as well. Right?
And that's one of the things that after the elections that they didn't want him to even speak. Can you say a little bit about that? I forget what the name of it was, but I know that the great grandson of Leopold was basically trying to say that colonialism was good for the Congo.
Right. At the handing off ceremony, that the Belgians had, everyone had to give a little bit of a talk. Kasavubu gave a talk, and he praised the Belgian colonial rulers, and of course, as you said, the great grandson again of King Leopold again. He also praised him, But again, Lumumba stepped up and he said, "No, let's tell the truth. These guys, they chopped our hands off, they raped our women, and so he basically in his speech, he blasted the Belgians, for that very sorry epoch of colonial rule in the Congo, right? Because the thing about the Congo, which I always find interesting, is that they committed a lot of atrocities in the Congo, but you also find similar atrocities in some of the other colonies as well, too. And so it wasn't just the Congo, but definitely the Congo becomes associated with that, and that's what he brought to the point.
We definitely know a little bit about the history of Cecil Rose and the diamonds and what happened. But one of the things that is interesting that we talked about the elephants is that they actually killed so many, chopped off so many hands and feet of the people in that area that they were starting to fear that they wouldn't even have a slave colonized people to even do their dirty work, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're depopulating so many areas. Yeah,
and that was before the genocidal title came out, Holocaust came out. But this was a Holocaust.
It was a Holocaust, right? Exactly. It was a Holocaust in the same way as the the Rwanda, or, you know, or the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. I mean, people were killed systematically, right, by a regime which you know, had no respect for human life, and that's what you see in the Congo, right? I mean,
yes.
So there's no difference. I mean, as you said, they estimate about 10 million people probably died during that time period. I mean, so that's a lot of people, right? And,
so wrapping it up and coming to the end, eventually he was so-called detained by the UN.
Yeah.
He escaped. And can you tell us the capturing and the end portion, and then we'll get into where we're at now?
Yeah. So you're right. He's detained. He's arrested, and then in Kinshasa, and then he's given protection, if you will, in a way. They also he's protection, but also they are also curtailing him from moving by the UN, right? But while he's under UN house arrest, he was left alone. He wasn't going to be killed, but he couldn't do anything either, right? And this point also, there's a conflict between Kasavubu and Lumumba, and there's a power struggle basically, right? And the UN ultimately sides with Kasavubu, right? Even though he was not the democratically elected again prime minister, right? But he used a clause in the Constitution to dismiss Lumumba, and then eventually get him arrested. So anyway,
and Lumumba had used the Senate or Parliament to remove Kasavubu,
right? Yeah, but they wouldn't recognize it.
Okay.
And so it was like an impasse, and it was like an impasse there, and so it was like a struggle. What do they do? And so during that, so again, he eventually is going to have him arrested by Mobutu, you know, his ally, surprisingly, and then the UN comes in, and they'll form a cordon around him. Basically, he's going to be basically under house arrest, right? But he's under house arrest on one hand, but on the other hand, he is in a sense in a cocoon by the UN. So so eventually, you know, there's an impasse, a struggle between him and Kasavubu. So he decides what he wants to do is break out and go back to Oriental, go back to the center where he has more support for people.
Right.
And so that's what he was trying to do when he tried to escape. But when he escaped, the Belgians were aware of his movements. You know, they had been provided and given support again by the U.S. Right. So they'd been bugging his phones, things like that. They knew what he was doing. So when he left, you know, they were able to tell Mobutu's people that you know, where he was going, and eventually Mobutu caught up with him. He caught him. And he caught him in full view of the UN, right? And they assaulted him, they tortured him, but the UN did nothing, right? And eventually, Mobutu transferred him to Shombe.
And this was to not cut you off, but there was an outcry from the Soviet Union, because of this. Yeah, definitely,
because again, the UN just they just sat by and let him basically be killed, right? And that's what, so really the complicity of the UN is that they recognized one party over another. They recognized Kasavubu, right, as a legitimate ruler of the Congo. Right. And the other thing also is that they just basically allowed him to be killed. Right. And so he's taken to Shombe, and eventually he's going to be killed, and you know, his body will be dissolved in acid. And
they dismembered him. Yeah. They put him and two others of his officers against the tree and the firing squad. Then they dismembered him. Yeah. Then they put him. I mean, because these are graphic details, but this is how brutal. Right. And Eisenhower, the president at that time, he wanted Lumumba dead.
Yeah, right. I mean, that was actual written evidence there. I mean, he actually called, and as you already mentioned, they actually tried to enact an assassination plot, but when they got to the Congo, they realized that it probably made more sense to let the Africans do it themselves. Right. And that's what happened eventually. Yeah. And so did the Belgians as well. They realized, why should we do this when we know they'll do it anyway? Right. So show them nuts, and they complied. And so that's what
So then we have Lumumba coming in and seizing power, and then we know from there the brutal history. Right. But one thing, and this is a side note, is that the IMF the World Bank were giving them this money
Yeah.
to basically carry on what the Belgians were doing by hacking off arms and legs,
Right.
and then saying that the Congo owed them debt. So the Congo was actually in debt for
Right.
purchasing the weapons that were used on the people.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's one of the sad ironies, right, at independence is that at independence, the Congo assumed the debt of the Belgian Congo.
That's
you know,
crazy.
Which is, yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all.
No.
So they have to be saddled with that, right? Yeah.
So Lumumba's his reign of terror ended.
Yeah.
Was his son? Did his son take his place at some point in time, or?
Oh no, Mobutu when he takes over in 1964.
Okay.
Right, and he'll rule until 1997.
Wow.
Time period, yeah.
Okay.
And then Mobutu is going to be overthrown by a coalition of different people, but eventually one of the actors who actually had been involved in the pre-independence politics, Laurent Kabila, comes to power.
Okay.
Yeah, and then Kabila will rule, and he eventually will be assassinated, and his son will take over, and that's who's the president of the Congo now,
Okay.
Joseph Kabila. Yeah, so that was. But you're right. Mobutu's period was just he was more or less just a robber baron.
Right.
He just simply accumulated wealth.
CIA payroll on the CIA
Exactly.
payroll.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I guess, the Congo in its situation now, did they forgive the debt? I believe that they were looking back about maybe 10 years ago of pardoning, as if they're doing them a favor.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, they haven't forgiven the debt yet, but they're under that program, the Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. Right? Again, so they will eventually forgive the debt once they meet certain criteria, for some of the countries out there, So.
And so now the family, I believe, is...
Yeah, right. The family of Lumumba, again, is suing again to bring some of these Belgian officials before the International Criminal Court, again, for crimes against humanity.
Okay.
Right? And so that's what they're trying to do now, because, again, obviously, the way that Lumumba met his demise was,
right.
that was a crime against humanity. So, again, so that's one. And what's also interesting about that case is that, in the recent past, just in the case of Africa, what you find is that many of the people who were brought before the ICC, they're African leaders like Charles Taylor, etc. But you will find that statesmen from more powerful countries, right, in the West, won't find themselves there. So that's another reason why it's a nice test case as well, to see how far this will go. Because
yes,
again, these are
true.
going to implicate Belgian officials, American officials, etc. So will they go that far? Will they go that far? And so that's one of the issues that comes up in that as well too.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you giving us this time to help bring us up to date, and so that more people will know about what's going on.
Right.
It's a little blip that was in the news. I don't even know if you had to watch alternative news to even hear about that. But we're going to help to hopefully bring our people up to speed.
Okay.
So once again, I want to thank you, Professor Okia, for giving us some of your time. And if we can, once this comes out a little further, we would like to come back and possibly do a second part.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Well, I appreciate it.
Okay, sure. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Sure.